Hello, I'm Dango Rose. Welcome to the Mountaineer Podcast, where everybody's listening. The Mountaineer brings you the latest news of the Peak to Peak region, in print, online, through our podcast, social media, and special publications. Now, listen in to the latest news of the area with our local journalists.
Hello there, everybody. My name is Jamie Lammers, and welcome to Music of the Mountains, Where to Be and What to See, brought to you by the Mountaineer Podcast. Today, I'm coming to you at the Colorado Press Association Conference in Denver, North Glen, and I'm really excited to be here, and I'm also glad to bring you this episode of Music of the Mountains, which is specifically focusing on Nederland jazz and wine. Before we get into today's interview, our preliminary announcements. This episode of the Mountaineer Podcast is sponsored by Regional Air Quality Council, the Front Range's lead air quality planning organization. RAQC collaborates with state governments, organizations, and individuals to improve air quality and protect Colorado's health and environment through planning, policy development, and program implementation. The RAQC's current priority is ground-level ozone, the Front Range's most pressing air quality issue. For more information, please visit raqc.org. To learn more about ground-level ozone, what individuals can do to protect their health, and how to help improve our summer air quality, please visit simplestepsbetterair.org. You can also sign up for timely text or email alerts on this website to know when it matters most. If you haven't subscribed to The Mountaineer and you want to get local news from peak to peak, then be sure to head to the mtnear.com and click on the subscribe button in the top right corner of our homepage. From there, you'll get full access to our digital archives and scanned copies of our physical newspaper. And you can choose to send a physical subscription to your mailbox or to the mailbox of someone that you love. If you're interested in being involved in the newspaper and or the podcast in any way, shape, or form, then be sure to email our editor-in-chief, Barbara Hart, at info@themountaineer.com, myself at media@themountaineer.com, and or our advertising department at frontdesk@themountaineer.com to see what opportunities are available. You can also learn more about our advertising packages by going to the mtnear.com/advertise, and you can ask us any questions directly. And before we really get into the interview, here's our top story today, brought to you by Brittany Wagner.
Our top story today comes from Mindy Leary, Timberline ready for groundbreaking. The Timberline Fire Protection District Board moved forward on August 12, 2025, with a contract amendment for the Station 3 Apparatus Bay expansion, a project now carrying a guaranteed maximum price of $2,446,900. The decision comes less than a week before the August 19th groundbreaking ceremony at the site on Highway 119. The amendment updates the March 2025 design-build agreement with Krish Construction, Inc. to reflect a cost of the work plus fee arrangement with an 8% design builder fee and a guaranteed maximum price. You can read the full story in this week's Mountaineer or at themountaineer.com.
Thank you, Brittany, for bringing us our top story. Now let's get into today's interview. Our guest this time around, do you mind introducing yourself real quick?
Absolutely, yeah. I am Jeffrey James Franca, and I live up here in Gilpin County, and I am debuting my band, The Shape of Jazz, at Nederland Jazz Wine Festival this year on August 23rd, Chipeta Park.
We're really excited to have The Shape of Jazz perform at Jazz and Wine. Can you tell us a little bit, Jeff, about how you got started in music in the first place and where you came from in your musical background?
Yeah, so my first musical instrument was actually guitar, and I started taking guitar lessons at a very young age, probably 5 or 6, and definitely just kind of was into it without realizing how into it I was for a while. And then in elementary school, they offered a band program where I got to play the snare drum, and I had gotten a drum set from my uncle that he had, and it all kind of just took off from there. It just kind of came naturally to the drumming thing, I guess, coming from guitar with some rhythm aspects. And then, I just really pursued music throughout public education and throughout college. I went to Indiana University and studied with some amazing jazz pedagogists there, including David Baker and Brent Walrab, and a lot of disciples of the Jamie Aebersold camp, which is kind of like jazz for the masses. He invented some pedagogical techniques techniques. And then, around 20 years old, I ended up out in California, in Los Angeles, performing with all sorts of film score composers and producers and musicians like Alex Acuna from Weather Report, and I got to play with Ray Barretto from the Fania crew back in the New Yorican era of Latin funk, and was always just kind of around these amazing opportunities for music and just gravitated towards constantly doing more, I guess you could say. And then once all that early life development stuff stopped, back in Washington, D.C., and was playing basically 8 nights a week. I was just playing all over town with African bands and jazz bands and reggae bands and funk bands, and that's how I ended up falling into the scene of the Thievery Corporation. And just kind of always devoted myself to the craft, and since I joined Thievery Corporation about 15 years ago, it's definitely been my main focus as far as being a drummer in a band. And it's been a long time since I've led a band, especially one where the concept is very much in line with what I was doing when I was in those later developmental years, which is a lot of composition, a lot of improvisation, and also a lot of exploring sound and genre bending. And it just feels really good to get back to that place where anything can happen, and trusting in the music and the concept behind the music and getting the pencil back on paper and writing some charts. And it's just been a really great experience, kind of feeling like at 40 years old now that, remembering that I did do all that stuff and I just haven't been just this touring musician my whole life. And so it's kind of coming full circle for me.
So, of course, you just talked about being the music director and the percussionist for Thievery Corporation, but you've been in a ton of other groups since then. And this group, of course, is going to be a very unique lineup. Was this lineup specifically created for Ned Jazz Wine?
This particular lineup, being called The Shape of Jazz, was absolutely conceived for Ned Jazz Wine. And it's been an opportunity that I've kind of taken and run with to, like I said, get back to some of that stuff that I was doing in my more heady years, and being friends with Steph and having some chats with her, and then kind of thinking about the state of affairs in the world and what the power of music can do and what it needs to do right now is all what we're going to be putting into our performance. And I think it's just very timely for me to kind of dive back into that world, but also for the community to be able to experience a performance that is not just, fun and dancey, but also thought-provoking and emotional. So, it was exactly for this reason. And I think having been up here for 3 years, I got my place in 2020 up here, but a friend lived in it for a couple of years, and just really wanting to contribute to the community outside of karaoke or open jam, something that really resonates within my soul. And so that's how we came up with the idea for The Shape of Jazz for Ned Jazz. And I think the idea behind the band moving forward could be any lineup depending on where I personally am. Say there's a festival or something, and, a slot that I could fill with just some friends that are there, really leaving it open for the music to just be the channel. And no matter kind of who it is or when it is, the shapes can form, kind of the idea.
So who is in this lineup for The Shape of Jazz?
So we have another local up here, Scott Messersmith. I don't know if you know Scott, but he's my next door neighbor. He's actually the one who tipped me off about the place that I live in being available. And he'll be on percussion. Then we'll have Hunter Roberts on bass, who plays around a lot. He's in the Butterfly Quintet with Dominic Lally and Adam Deitch and Borum Lee and Eric Benny Bloom. And then Nate Miller, who moved here from Washington a few years back. He's a younger guy, but he plays sax and trumpet, both equally well. And we're going to have him play horns. I've also worked with Nate in Thievery Corporation. We hire him when we play in Colorado. And I've also worked with Nate in Flamingosis live band. And then we'll have Matt Jalbert on guitar from Talk. I don't know if you know that band, but they're just really incredible players, and his musical sensitivity is kind of what stuck out to me when I played with him at first. And then a local legend, Joey Porter, on keyboards from the Motet. And I think that's it. That's the 6 of us. So a lot of colors to work with, a lot of wonderful musicians to let off the hook, let off the leash and see what happens.
And you've performed in quite a few capacities over the years with different groups and even in your own solo projects. What's been great for you about performing jazz and developing your skills in the style of jazz? And what's especially been great about embracing performances in jazz?
Yeah, I think it's a constant learning process. A lot of soul searching and a lot of listening and trying to understand people that are around you, how they communicate and how they respond to everything from a suggestion to a compliment, and just really trying to carry the lessons of life and karma and all the wonderful things that we, experience daily into a group setting where people are putting their hearts on the line. It can be a little difficult sometimes, but I think the experience of being a musical director for Thievery Corporation, and also I mentioned the Flamingosas live band that we got off the ground and I was a musical director for, it's definitely something that I think the years of all the different experiences have lended itself to me being able to communicate with all different types of musicians. And I think that's one of the most important parts when you're trying to form a new group, or when you're trying to polish something for performance or whatever it is, just to be able to remain present and get your point across, but also being sensitive to everybody's way of understanding music and communicating what they understand about the music. And but nobody ever knows it all, It's all, you learn something new every 2 seconds when you're dealing with a group of people, and how that can go. So you just always have to be open to learning and to communicating well, and that's what you get the boat in the water.
And I'm curious, why did you end up leaning toward the style of jazz as your music style of choice?
I think when I really started to tackle the drum set, I was heavily in the orchestral world. For my youth, I was in the American Youth Philharmonic and these amazing programs around Washington, D.C. that had really legit youth orchestras, and we would tour and we would perform in Carnegie Hall with Arturo Sandoval, and it was just all sorts of stuff that was a lot of notes on the page and being part of a bigger thing, which I think is an amazing concept to learn. But when it became apparent that I was the type of artist that was kind of a generative artist, I like to create the art myself and write the music myself and be more active in the generative role behind the music and not just regurgitating somebody's version of Beethoven's Ninth Symphony for the rest of my life or whatever it be. I definitely would say that the exploratory days of a late teen, early 20s adventurous person opened my mind to the philosophies behind certain elements of jazz, and also the world that has spawned from jazz, whether it be free performance or sound design, soundscape, whatever it is that came from the channel that jazz is, at this point, people were sick of the term in the 70s, so at this point it's kind of just like, what is jazz? Jazz is everything. Jazz is, I don't know. But it fit to where my philosophies behind music were in those developmental years, as far as being a channel for the spirit of music and being open to letting the music come through you and transcending the energy and the spirit of improvisation. And that probably stemmed from getting into bands like Fish when I was in high school and their elements of improvisation, and then me continuing to dig deeper into improvised music and then realizing that obviously that jazz is this amazing well of just progress within music and pushing the boundaries and riding the waves of technological advances in the studio, and the genre similar to, I don't know what it's really similar to, but the genre having started, let's say, in the early 20th century ragtime music and this and that, and then really follows the timeline of modernization. I would say probably more than any music, because it's so codified as a improvisational art, I believe that lends itself to being very reactive to the environment around it, politically, technologically, culturally. And so to watch the timeline of jazz is to watch the timeline of modernization and, American history. And it's just such an indicative element of our society and our culture. And to see eventually artists like Robert Glasper and artists like Tribe Called Quest fusing jazz and hip hop and obviously the Roots, and that kind of all happened when I was a teen, when these Soulquarian crew and all these new second generation soul artists, neo soul, kind of came along and really just opened up the floodgates for all these genres to be together. My friend DJ Logic just played with the Philadelphia Experiment, which is Christian McBride and Yuri Kane, and I think Kurt Rosenwinkel was in it, but I didn't see him at the gig, and Questlove, and he was on turntables for a jazz concert. So it's just like, at this point, it just represents so much progress and history within what music has become. Jazz is just right there all the time on the edges of these new eras for the last, call it, even 100 years at this point. Going back to the swing era, and the flappers and all that. It really was just always on the cusp of what was happening in society. So it's alive. It always stays alive, and it's always morphing, and it's just a beautiful, beautiful way to express yourself and to be a part of something.
So you also compose your own material. Do you lean more into music, lyrics, or both? Have you worked more on one or both over the years?
Recently, I've been getting more into lyricism, but really kind of limitation as a spawn of creation. I really started writing a lot of music when I would say around 20 years old. I started to realize that mainly in the classical percussion world, the music that I was looking for to perform as a solo artist wasn't really out there. And a lot of music you'd read or you'd try or play a little bit of, it felt to me like people that were composing for percussion, a lot of them didn't understand the essence of what percussion and drumming is. So I liked to write pieces to put that, what I felt was the essence of drumming and percussion, into the music. And if you write your own music, you can write to your strengths, so you can practice something that nobody else can do and then put it into your piece. And it's a freedom of expression thing. And then when it came to jazz and composing for big bands and small groups, it was always more interesting to me to come up with something new, even if it sounded like something old, than to learn all the chord changes of every standard and become this jazz jam superhuman. I was always more into the creative aspect of it and where that could lead versus just knowing everything really well. That's pretty much how that started.
So in terms of performances, do you prefer playing in lineups with other people? Do you prefer perhaps playing in a solo capacity? Are there pros and cons to both? Are there particular reasons you like performing in both?
I have a solo project called Ethno, which means culture, which basically is a huge catalog of electronic music that I've written that pays homage to all of my cultural influences. When you're in drumming, when you're a drummer and a percussionist, it's not like the trumpet or a modern Western instrument. When you take on drumming, you're looking into a clear blue ocean that has no floor. Drumming's been around since antiquity. Rhythms and people hitting things before they'd even had language, so depending on how far back you want to go, it's there for you in drumming. So versus other instruments like, let's just keep saying the trumpet. Yeah, trumpets play in salsa bands and trumpets play in other cultural Balkan bands and all this, right? But the trumpet wasn't around 400, 500 years ago the way it is now with valves and all this. And the purpose of the drum has been around for so long as we've had man or civilization or whatever, even before civilization. So that word ethno, in culture, every culture has their drum. So it's so interesting to be from the drummer standpoint in the world and have this access to a deep part of many people's culture. And it really opens your eyes to acceptance and curiosity and understanding, and basically the opposite of bigotry and isolation and colonialization and imperialization and ethnic cleansing and all this stuff that's terrible about the world. If you really look at the drum as a bridge between borders and bridging the gap between cultures, and your ears just kind of go everywhere. So the solo project just has a lot of that worldly influence, and it's electronic music, so I DJ it and I play congas and electronic mallet instrument while I do it sometimes, and sometimes it's just a DJ set. But I am working on some stuff where I'll be probably singing and playing some guitar, and yeah, the mountains are inspiring. There's kind of a different thing that hits you up here, and definitely thought and been writing a little more for just some song purposes, just nice chords and a good lyric, you know? It's just always interesting to me to see what's out there when you actually sit down and try to put it down.
And you've been able to develop your career a lot over the time that you've been performing, to the point where now you're able to perform with bands that have inspired you in some way, shape, or form, or bands in the same area of music that have influenced you over all this time. You've even jumped in with Grateful Dead member Bill Kreutzmann's band, Billy and the Kids, to perform. What's it been like being able to perform in these various jazz groups and jam bands and all of these different groups that end up embracing the styles of music that you love most?
Yeah, I think definitely what I was getting at is having the interest in bands that risk it, basically. That one of the attractions for a band like Fish, and I'm not really into jam bands. I wouldn't, you know, and I guess Fish falls in that category, but to Mix and the Dead, they've crossed out of jam band status, even though whatever, you know, we all know how it goes. But the element of improvisation and the idea that playing with Bill Kreutzmann and maybe all day not all day anything because we hardly practiced, but maybe we tried something one way in rehearsal, we got on the stage and it was just gone. You know, we didn't even think about that. We just did it completely differently, you know, and that at first was, you know, like, oh, of course that's what we do because this is a Grateful Dead type band, right? But then it really sunk in that is so integral in the fabric of the approach to that music and other musics. And then looking back at jazz cats from getting out of bebop and getting into more of the cool style of music, the Stan Getz, the birth of cool, the early Miles Davis solo albums, when it's not him and Bird playing all the bebop standards. This is when the artistry and the compositions are no longer coming from the vaudeville or from Broadway or from Rodgers and Hammerstein or from Cole Porter. They're coming from the people playing them and getting that door opened by certain bands, and then really those jazz recordings and the element and the idea of jazz and the history of jazz was exactly where my philosophy was and is getting back to. But it takes a lot of experiences to remind yourself of that and to learn that what you thought it was, it actually is, or maybe it wasn't. And you can only learn that through experience. And getting to play with guys like Kreutzmann and some other cats, like I mentioned before, Ray Barretto, and these people that were really pioneering genres and pioneering music in a way that brought it to where we're at today. You know, those people are from the 50s, 60s, 70s. They're not all around anymore. And I think it's really important to keep the spirit of that alive, especially when we're looking at times that history is repeating itself in society and politically. And that's when these protest songs and these protest musics were so vital and so continually progressive. And that is the gift, and that is really what we're trying to fit the shape of jazz to the people.
And for you, what are the most rewarding parts about being able to get up on stage and share this music with an audience?
I think the first time I produced a track and played it on the sound system while people are dancing, they don't know it's my song, and they just keep going and dancing like it could be whatever, John Summit or something, some big, who knows. But that was a huge moment for me to realize that the music I wrote, people, they're responding in a way that I respond to songs that I like. And so outside of when I'm with Thievery, a huge part of what keeps me present there is those are big crowds. I try to really focus on that connection of each soul that's out there I'm touching, because I didn't write that music. I have a very strong hand in reproducing it for the live stage and making little remixes to modernize certain things or to re-present songs that weren't presented for a long time. But with Ethno, it's really, I can get up there in front of 8 people, and even if they're not dancing, because I've written all the music, it's just always fun. It's just mind-blowing to me that I could even write one song that could connect to one person, let alone build a little following or sell some tickets or have a festival where there's a bunch of people there that are just hearing music that they've probably never really heard before and opening themselves to it and hearing elements that are familiar but not exactly the same and presented in a new way. And so being that that's my project, it's really just a labor of love. To be able to play music that you've written for people is just, regardless of how successful it gets or whether you make some money or whether it's a hobby, it is just a very rewarding thing. And I think I've been hooked on it for quite some time now.
And what do you hope people take away from your shows and or your music when they come to see you?
For me, music is my voice in the world. So I'm not necessarily one to go get into a political debate and stuff like that, especially these days when people are just feeling their oats behind their screens and all this stuff. It really is the point of me to use the gift of music for awareness, for change, for education. I'd love to play a song with a deep West African traditional groove for somebody that is thinking that white people invented rock and roll or something, and somebody that maybe is not on the most, what would I say, enlightened side of society, and be like, oh, I really like this. What is this? Well, this is a groove from West Africa, from this region, blah, blah, blah. You can educate people, and you can make people be not so afraid to travel and to learn about other cultures and make people understand that everybody's culture is beautiful and there's something in everything that can be turned into music, and to bring people together and to forget about these fake borders people have put up, and to really just learn about culture and the fact that everybody's culture is valid. And that is what Ethno's all about. That is what, when I perform, I mean, I'm not sure I'd still be in Thievery Corporation if I wasn't down with the message of the music. 15 years of my life, it's a lot of time on the road, but I can be confident in the fact that when we go and we play for people and they're singing The Richest Man Babylon, or they're singing history or American Mock along with us, that I am behind that message, even though I did not write those songs. And that is really the huge box to check, because a lot of the drum beats don't change. It's what's on top of them that changes. And, you know, I don't know if I'd be happy playing arenas, saying Friday Night Truck, yeah, I love this, but whatever these, to me, meaningless songs are that perpetuate people in their bubble. I like to pop that bubble, and I like to make people realize and maybe even make them uncomfortable, you know, but to the point where, for me, it has to be revolutionary. It has to be in the vein of Bob Marley, in the vein of Fela Kuti, in the vein of Miles Davis, in the vein of James Brown, in the vein of Stevie Wonder, in the vein of Stevie Ray, you know, in the vein of Fugazi, in the vein of Bad Brains, in the vein of The Roots, in the vein of all these artists who use their art to do more than just entertain and to really try to change. And that's what it's all about for me. If that element isn't there, I'm probably not there.
Well, is there anything else in general that you want to add about your music or the upcoming performance or anything else?
No, I'm just super grateful to be a part of the community up here and to be able to offer my pure musical offering at Ned Jazz. It's an amazing opportunity to think that I never would have thought 3 years ago, oh, I'm putting a band together to headline Ned Jazz. You know, it's just, I didn't move up here to be touch and go. I moved up here to be a part of the community as much as I can. And I love it. And I've made a lot of great friends, and it's going to be just an amazing, fun time. But the last kind of concept behind the Shape of Jazz also is, you know, with all these automated systems and Spotify investing in AI bands and AI artists and putting out this music that people aren't really creating, is another reason that we are approaching the Shape of Jazz the way we are, because there's certain things that are irrecreatable, and that's what we're going for. Not in a way of like, freak out jazz, blah, 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 blah. Just, no, our approach, we want it to be free. Like, I don't want any of the band members to think that there's something they can do wrong in this environment. We want to push it until it's pushed too far, and we want to really trust the vehicle that we are as humans as the catalyst between the vibes, the spirits, the music, the universe, whatever you want to call it, and to be the channel to get that out to the people. That's what we want to clear out. That's what we want to fully open up, so that when people feel something that they know you can't put into ChatGPT, that you can't type in a prompt and say, here's this. We're really avoiding that energy, and we're bringing in energy that is antiquitously human, and that's the goal. Even though humans are kind of shitty right now, but still, we're going to try to be good ones.
In that case, I think those are the big questions that I have on my end.
Cool. Well, I'm really happy to be able to explain this stuff. I think if people read it, it will enhance their experience at the show.
Thank you so much, Jeff, for coming on board and joining us for the podcast. Jeffrey James Franca will be bringing his headlining band, The Shape of Jazz, to the Netherlands Jazz and Wine Festival and debuting it there on Saturday, August 23rd. The festival takes place in Chapita Park, and they'll be the final performers of the day from 3 to 5 p.m. The festival starts at 11 a.m. with the Chantil Ducart Duo performing until noon. Then, Robert Johnson and the Mark Diamond Trio will perform from noon to 2 p.m. The Chantil Ducart Duo will perform again from 2 to 3 p.m. And then The Shape of Jazz will close the event from 3 to 5 p.m. Be sure to learn more about the festival by heading to nedjazzwine.com. And you can keep up with Jeff Franca on his Facebook page and at his solo project's website, ethno-global.com. Thank you so much, everybody, for listening to this week's Music of the Mountains, Where to Be and What to See, brought to you by the Mountaineer Podcast. I've got a couple other interviews with people involved from the Netherlands Jazz and Wine Festival that I'm going to be getting out in the next day or two. In the meantime, if you want to share this episode or others around with whoever you see fit, then be sure to head to the mtnear.com and scroll near to the bottom of our homepage, or head to our podcast's main hub at the mtnearpodcast.buzzsprout.com to see a full archive of all of our episodes. Again, if you're interested in being involved in any way, shape, or form with the podcast and or the newspaper, then be sure to email info@themountaineer.com, media@themountaineer.com, and or frontdesk@themountaineer.com to ask us any questions you have and propose any ideas you have. And finally, to find our most important pages, be sure to head to our individual episode descriptions of each of our podcast episodes to find our Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, and events calendar where you can submit local events coming to your venue and or the community as a whole, and find other important pages at the top right side of our homepage. I will see you guys next time. Have a great rest of your day.
And that's it for our show. Subscribe online to get more access to more news, weekly updates to our community calendar, and a link to our YouTube channel by visiting themountaineer.com. Be sure to use the coupon code PODCAST when subscribing for a 10% discount, only available to our listeners. If you are in the local Peak to Peak area, be sure to pick up a print edition of The Mountaineer at a local business. I'm Dango Rose. Thank you for listening.